one thing we're getting ready to talk about his most famous action, and this is going to take place in what's called the Colmar Pocket. So to kind of explain this to people that aren't aware, because this is one of those offshoot things that unless you're really into it, you might not know about. You know, if you're just if you've only watched things like Band of Brothers and maybe some of the History Channel documentaries,
Right.
you might not really know what the Colmar Pocket is.
Yeah, I've never heard of it.
So with the Ardennes offensive that the Germans launched, culminating what's known as the Battle of the Bulge,
Okay.
there will be another operation that they launch to support that operation, and it's called Operation Nordwind or North Wind, and it's the last major German offensive of the war.
Okay.
All right. Now, it gets pushed back pretty quickly, with the exception of one little pocket, and it's around the region of Colmar.
I wonder if a certain somebody's going to be there.
Well, he's definitely going to be there, and he's
Yeah.
gonna make the biggest bang he's made to this point.
All right.
Now it's an 850 square mile area. In the dude, again, these names I just have the hardest time pronouncing, but the Vosges Mountains, Vosges Mountains, Vosges, Vosges Mountains, Vosges Mountains.
Vogue.
I don't know.
Vogue.
Listen, man, I'm not cultured in the way of pronouncing, pronouncing these names, but I'm trying my best here. But it had been held by the German troops since November of 1944. Right?
Okay.
They're really dogging it out over there.
Yeah.
And it's securing a bridgehead across the Rhine. This is like the last bridgehead that the Nazis are occupying across the Rhine. Well, Murphy will describe the Colmar Pocket like this. He says this, quote, "A huge and dangerous bridgehead thrusting west of the Rhine like an iron fist, fed with men and material from across the river. It is a constant threat to our right flank, and potentially it is a perfect springboard from which the enemy could start a powerful counterattack." So that's the end quote. That's Murphy's description of the Colmar Pocket.
Well, I'm sure the Germans blew all the other bridges, and now this is kind of like, hold on to this one as much as possible so you can launch your offensive operations or, defend it and blow it or something, whatever.
Now, the thing that Audie Murphy doesn't know at this time is the Germans just don't have the manpower to be able to launch another offensive. With the fight going on in the east,
Sure.
and then elsewhere in the west, they just don't have it. They just don't have it anymore. I mean, at this point in the war, Russia is super close to Berlin.
Yeah.
Super close.
The Eastern Front onslaught.
And moving quick.
Yeah.
So he'll rejoin his platoon on January 14th, 1945, and right off the bat, the 3rd Infantry Division will be engaged in a 16-day battle to secure bridgeheads around the Rhine River near the Colmar Canal.
Okay.
It's after that 16-day battle that the 15th Infantry Regiment will be ordered to the town of Holtzwihr. And this is where we're really setting the stage for something
All
incredible, okay? Now, from its peak of 235 men, disease, injuries, and casualties has reduced Company B's fighting strength down to 18 men. 18 men. That's a company.
Jeez.
Dude, that's almost not even a squad.
Yeah.
It's just so few guys, dude.
Yeah, what can you do?
That's just nuts to me. Down to 18 guys. It's unbelievable. Now, Murphy, being the only officer remaining on the 26th of January, was made the company commander. And this is where we get into what is Audie Murphy's most notable feat in the war. Now, set up outside the town of Holtzwihr, this is how Audie Murphy describes their position.
Okay.
He says this, quote, "We are at the butt end of a U-shape whose sides are formed by finger-like extensions of the woods stretching towards Holtzwihr. Directly before us are flat open fields, beyond which I can see a church steeple and housetops in the village, a mile away. The narrow road over which we had been pounding our feet leads from the woods to the town," end quote. So, to paint a little bit more of a clear picture, there's the town of Holtzwihr, and then just outside the town of Holtzwihr is this U-shaped wood tree line, right? And in the middle of that U-shaped tree line are open fields with one road coming up the middle of it, or off to one side a little bit, but almost up the middle of it.
Sure.
It's at the butt end, the bottom end of that U, where Audie Murphy's company is positioned. The rest of the regiment, the rest of the 15th Infantry Regiment, is a mile in their rear, right? So
It's far out.
Yeah, they're a long ways away, and it's his job to hold that line. He can, because they're the rest of the 15th Infantry Regiment are waiting for resupplies and replacements, combat replacements.
So he's only out there with like 18 guys, possibly.
I want to say that he does get he gets a little drop of some replacements before he goes up, but I think at most he's got like 30, 40 guys at the most to hold this position. Now, they do have some support. They have 2 M10 tank destroyers sent up there to support them. They're both positioned on the road. One is in the woods, in the tree line with the rest of the infantry, and the other is a few yards in front of that, out in the open on the road.
Okay.
Audie Murphy puts his CP in between those 2 tanks, those 2 tank destroyers. It's at this point, around 2 p.m., that the Germans will launch their attack towards Audie Murphy's position and the rest of B Company's position.
So they're going into the U-shaped, like from the town, they're going into the U-shaped tree line, basically. Okay.
Yep. Now, the Germans, well, let me let Audie Murphy describe this to you, because he has a way. It sounds good when he does it here. But he says this, quote, "I see the Germans lining up for an attack. 6 tanks rumble to the outskirts of Holtzwihr, split into groups of 3s, and fan out toward either side of the clearing. Then wave after wave of white dots, barely discernible against the background of snow, start across the field. They are enemy infantry wearing snow capes and advancing in a staggered skirmish formation," end quote. So to give you some numbers, he did say, yes, 6 enemy tanks. They're Panthers, enemy yard Panthers, which are monster tanks.
Big tanks.
Actually, they're so monster, I'm going to spill the beans here a little bit early, but one of the M10s will get a round off on one of them, and the round just bounces off the Panther. It just doesn't do anything to it.
Dude, that's frightening.
That is super scary, super scary. And it's reported that roughly 200 to 250 infantry are accompanying these 6 tanks. So even if he has 40 guys, let's just say that Audie Murphy has 40 guys, only 18 of them are veterans. The rest are combat replacements, and they're going up against 6 tanks and 200 to 250 infantry. They are in a terrible predicament.
Yeah, to say the least.
Now, right off the rip, things are going to start going south for these guys real quick. One of the German Panthers will score a direct hit on the one of the M10s, the one that's back in the tree line, and it'll go up in flames immediately. And the other one, as it'll throw it into reverse and try to reverse down the road to kind of get back towards the tree line and get some cover. Like I had mentioned, he's shooting rounds and hitting Panthers, and they're just bouncing off. Eventually, they, in their attempt to try to pull back a little bit, they run off the road and slide down into a ditch, and it leaves the main gun at an angle to where it's ineffective. It can't be employed against any of the enemies, so it's just hanging off at an angle they can't use.
Bail out.
So the crew bails out. They bail out. So right off the rip, any armored support that Audie Murphy and B Company had, it's gone.
It's gone.
It's just gone. I'm going to quote Audie Murphy a good bit here, because he, it's hard not to quote the man himself when he's given us the story.
Sure, it's right from the horse's mouth. Why not?
But this is what he has to say. Quote, "I grab a map, estimate the enemy's position, and seize the field telephone. Calling over the telephone, he gets a response. This is a battalion. It's a headquarters lieutenant back at the battalion CP.
Yeah.
Murphy responds, 'This is Murphy. We're being attacked. Get me the artillery.' When he gets put through the artillery, he says this, quote, 'I want a round of smoke at coordinates 30.5 minus 60 and tell those Joes to shake the lead out.'" I love the way they talked back then, man. Basically, he's saying, dude, let it go. Yeah. Let it go. There's a lot of people. We need all the arty we can get. The guy on the other end of the line asks, how many Krauts? Murphy responds, 6 tanks that I can see and maybe a couple hundred foot soldiers supporting. The guy on the other end of the line says, he says, "Good God, how close." You can see this playing out, dude.
Sure.
Good God, how close. Audie Murphy responds, "Close enough. Give me that artillery," end quote. So things are really, really, really taking a turn.
It's very urgent. It's dire at this point. Full send.
Now, the tanks, all this is happening super fast. And the tanks are maneuvering closer. They're close enough now that the machine guns on the tanks are actually raking the line of infantry.
Mm.
And Murphy is realizing very quickly that his guys are not first off, they're not in a position that they can defend against that many infantry and armor. And secondly, they don't have the tools to be able to take out armor, right? The tools they have are now out of the fight. All they've got left is this artillery. So he decides to give the order to send his men back into the tree line a few hundred yards where they have a secondary line set up that's a little more defensible. It's deeper into the woods. You're not so exposed. And this is what Murphy has to say about this. Quote, "The tanks are now close enough to rake our position with machine gun fire. Of the 128 men that began the drive, not over 40 remain, and I am the last," so less than 40 is what he has.
Okay.
"And I am the last of 7 officers. Trying to stop the armor with our small arms is useless. I yell to the men to start pulling out. One of his men asks, 'What about you?' And Murphy responds, 'I'm staying up with the phone as long as I can. Get the men back and keep them grouped,' end quote. So again, he has this like urge to get his men out of the danger while he stays in and fights. I mean, it's like the ultimate big brother mentality.
Yeah.
Like, I've got this. You guys go.
And for someone to ask, "What about you?" They it's a pattern. They know what he's getting ready to do, or possibly do.
Now, Murphy is calling in fire on all on the tanks and infantry, and notices that the enemy tanks are starting to veer off. They're not coming straight down the middle anymore. He starts engaging the infantry with his carbine, his M1 carbine, until he runs out of ammunition. And just as he's getting ready to pull back himself, he looks over and sees the M10 that's on fire, and sees that it has a 50 cal on top, and there's tons of crates of ammo over there that have been undisturbed. Now, let's just talk about the thought about what he's getting ready to do, because that tank is on fire, right? And not only does it have all that 50 cal ammo on the outside, but it's got all the main gun tank rounds on the inside. And if those catch fire, dude, it is game over. Not to mention the fuel that the tank runs on, too.
Yeah.
That thing will blow sky high. But Audie Murphy, being Audie Murphy, says this, quote, "As I turned to run, I noticed the burning tank destroyer. On its turret is a perfectly good machine gun and several cases of ammunition. The German tanks have suddenly veered to the left. I changed my plans and dragged the telephone," he's talking about the field telephone, "to the top of the tank destroyer. The body of the lieutenant with whom I talked earlier in the morning is sprawled over the edge of the hatch. His throat has been cut. A small river of blood streams down the side of the tank destroyer. I finished dragging the body out and dump it in the snow. The telephone rings. How close are they?" Murphy responds, "Just hold the phone and I'll let you talk to one of the bastards."
Oh, wow. What an incredible response.
That's close, dude. If he's saying that, that's freaking close. Now, Murphy, checks the machine gun. He gives the butterfly trigger a little tap, and it goes off, and he says it's like music to his ears. So at this point, Murphy starts engaging the infantry with this 50 caliber machine gun. Here are some eyewitness accounts of what's going on here.
Okay.
This is from Private Anthony Abramsky. Anthony Abramsky. He says this, quote, "It was like standing on top of a time bomb. He was standing on the tank destroyer chassis, exposed to enemy fire from his ankles to his head, and silhouetted against the trees and the snow behind him," end quote.
Silhouetted.
Now, Murphy will describe his position as being actually in some cover because the smoke coming from the fire
Makes sense.
was kind of obscuring him to the vision of the Germans. He'll also say, too, that, quote, "The gun has thrown the Krauts into confusion. Evidently, they cannot locate its position. Later, I am told that the burning tank destroyer loaded with gasoline and ammunition was expected to blow up at any minute. That was why the enemy tanks gave it a wide berth, and the infantrymen could not conceive of a man using it for cover." Now, this is the best part of this quote. I'm getting ready to read.
All right.
He goes on to say, I do not know about that. For the time being, my imagination is gone, and my numbed brain is intent on only destroying. I am conscious only that the smoke and the turret afford a good screen, and that for the first time in 3 days, my feet are warm," end quote.
Wow, how thoughtful.
I mean, what a savage, dude.
In these moments.
He's standing on a burning tank, and he's like, "At least my feet are warm."
Yeah.
Good God, that's just nuts, man. It's nuts. Now, throughout this fighting, dude, Germans are going to try to flank this position. There'll be a squad of 12 Germans that will actually get within a few yards of the tank, and they'll be down in a ditch. And just as these Germans are getting ready to come out and charge through Murphy's position and either kill him or take him prisoner, he describes it as a break in the smoke, and he can see them, and he turns the 50 cal around and just sweeps them, all of them, kills them all. And he does this time and time again, man.
Yeah.
While he's engaging all these infantry, that M10 tank destroyer will not once but twice take direct hits from the Panther guns, the Panther main guns. So
That's
two more times it'll get rocked with a tank main gun, and he stays on top, continuing to fight.
He's just like, he must just be blacked out, just going crazy.
Dude, he's in a different place at this point.
Totally different place.
And all the while, still calling in artillery. And every time he's calling it in, he's calling it closer and closer and closer. Case in point, I'm going to read you kind of a long quote. This kind of takes us back a little bit into the story, but this will give you an idea of how this artillery barrage is working. Murphy says this in his book, To Hell and Back. Quote, "The barrage lands within 50 yards of the tank destroyer. The shouting, screaming Germans caught in it are silent now. The enemy tanks, reluctant to advance further without infantry support, lumber back towards Holtzwihr. I snatch up the telephone receiver. Sergeant Bose, correct fire, 50 over, and keep firing for effect. This is my last change." Now the sergeant that he's talking to says this, 50 over, that's your position. Murphy replies, I don't give a damn, 50 over, and send it, right?
This is my last.
So on my pause, send the Audie.
Yeah.
He says, concussion from the enemy barrage almost knocks me from the tank destroyer. For a moment, I am stunned, and then I see the telephone receiver in my hand. The telephone line has been knocked out. It's been disabled from this most recent barrage. So after all of that, Murphy says this, quote, "As if under the influence of some drug, I slide off the tank destroyer and without once looking back, walk down the road through the forest. If the Germans want to shoot me, let them. I am too weak from fear and exhaustion to care. Except for a vague pain in my leg," which he had a wound that had been stitched up and had reopened in this fight.
Okay.
So, except for a vague pain in my leg, I feel nothing. No sense of triumph, no exhilaration at being alive. Even the weariness seems to have passed. Existence has taken on the quality of a dream in which I am detached from all that is present. I hear the shells bursting among the trees, see the dead scattered on the ground, but I do not connect them with anything that particularly concerns me." End quote.
I'd have to read that like 10 more times. It might take me 10 years to ever like think or try to relate to any part of that. Well, I can relate to certain parts of it, but like just, you got to break every part of that down.
Dude,
and know
he's
what's
just
going on.
entered a different realm of reality. And
Yes.
listen, the story goes on. The fight's not over, right? That fight's not over. He goes back into the woods, and now he's bleeding pretty bad from the wound in his leg, but refuses any kind of medical attention. He reorganizes his company and then launches a counterattack. And he goes on the counterattack with his men. It's not until they push the Germans back into the city, he'll stop in the middle of that open field and let a medic treat him.
No kidding.
Dude, the guy is just fighter to the core, man.
With that image in my mind, when you were reading that, of him walking away into the woods, like the flames and the smoke and the snow and everything, it kind of just seemed like the end of a movie and the hero's walking away, World War II's over, but no, not even close.
No, he gets right back into it, dude.
Right back into it.
Audie Murphy is accredited with killing. The numbers vary. Some of the eyewitnesses say that he killed at least 100 men. I think on his Medal of Honor citation it says 50. But even on the small end, 50 Germans, and then single-handedly repelling an assault by 6 tanks.
Yeah.
That's just incredible.
There's probably so many that they don't even know about that he got to.
Oh, dude, unbelievable. Now, another eyewitness account will say this. This is from Sergeant Elmer Brawley. He says this, quote, "During his indomitable one-man struggle, Lieutenant Murphy broke the entire attack of the Germans and held hard-won ground that it would have been disastrous to lose." End quote. Guy's just unbelievable.
He's like the human Murphy's Law against the Germans.
Audie Murphy's Law.
Yeah, Audie Murphy's Law.